All right, nice to meet everybody virtually today, and my function is to bore everybody completely with some mathematics after a break. So that's what I'm going to do. So Recruiter GPS, essentially what we're talking about here is you have all these methodologies for running a recruiting firm and all the various techniques, but how do all these things pull together to give you certain and predictable revenue? So we have over the years developed a set of metrics that we use to track the functioning of a recruiting firm and get a good degree of predictability in terms of revenue. So before I get going with looking at how we would model a recruiting firm, there's a few assumptions that I use when modeling a firm. So the first assumption is that recruitment is sold, it's not bought. So nobody wakes up in the morning as a client and says, today I'm going to go and find me a recruiting firm. It's a service that is pushed to the market, and clients will go with the firm that is familiar to them, that they know of. But the recruiting firm reaches out to the client, not vice versa. The second assumption that we work off is that we'll qualify a job order prior to working with it. So we're not going to just, if you are accepting emailed job orders and working them, then there'll be certain issues within your metrics that will come into play, and we can chat at that at a later date. But we're working off the assumption here that if there's a job order, we're at least going to have a conversation with somebody in the firm to discuss the pros and cons and what it is that they're trying to achieve with the fulfillment of this particular vacancy. The next assumption that we work off is that we'll qualify a candidate prior to submitting that candidate. So we're not just going to take a resume and shoot it across to a client without ever having spoken to that candidate. We might have spoken to that candidate sometime in the past and they're quite familiar to us, but we will always qualify a candidate prior to submitting them to a client. The last assumption that we use is that, and this is very important from a recruiting perspective, where the industry feels like a little bit of black magic. We feel like we can't really predict how much money we're going to make this month. Maybe we'll make a placement, maybe we won't make a placement. And what we're wanting to do with metrics is really to drive home is that placements are not the thing that you can chase. Placements are a result of your activities. And our function as recruiters is to maximize the number of buying decisions that take place. So let's take some other industries. If I was a realtor and I'm selling homes, if I want to maximize the number of homes I sell, I need to maximize the number of homes I'm showing people. If I was somebody selling cars, then I'd want to maximize the number of test drives that I was going through. So in recruiting, we need to maximize what buying decision do we need to maximize? And the decision to take a role or not to take a role, or to hire a candidate or not hire a candidate, that decision is taken during the interview. So our goal as recruiters is to maximize the number of buying decisions. And in order to do that, we must maximize the number of first-time interviews that take place. We cannot maximize placements. If we maximize first-time interviews, we will maximize placements, but we don't make the decision to take a role. We don't make the decision to hire a candidate. That decision is between the hiring manager and the job applicant. Some of them are going to meet and fall in love, and some of them that you swore would fall in love never get working together. So the only thing we can do is maximize the number of times that a buying decision takes place. And in order to maximize the number of buying decisions, we need to maximize the number of first-time interviews, or what is also known as a send-out. So a first-time interview is the first time that a candidate and a client have a conversation about their opportunity. It can be in person, it can be over the phone, but that's our key metric. If there's one thing that you take away from today, is that tracking first-time interviews is the single most important number you can track in a recruiting firm. If you track nothing else, if you track first-time interviews and make sure that you're getting to a set number of first-time interviews on a weekly, monthly basis, you will hit your revenue goals. So that as a number one takeaway. So what are the various activities that we have within the recruiting process? Of course, we have the dial attempt. This is where we make an attempt to reach somebody, sometimes tracked by firms, sometimes not that critical to track. A recruit presentation is a first-time conversation with a candidate about a role or about your firm. A marketing presentation is a first-time conversation with a client about your firm or a particular candidate, or to qualify a job order that they've given you. A submission is the sending of a resume or presenting the profile of a candidate to a hiring manager. A job order, I think that's pretty self-evident. That's a job order that you're prepared to work. A first-time interview send-out, as we mentioned before, is the single most important measure that we have in the recruiting industry. If you track anything, you should track that. Then other metrics that we could track is the number of offers, the number of offers in terms of the revenue that would generate, placements in terms of number of placements, and then placements in terms of total amount of fee. Now, Mike has asked me today to maybe go through working from send outs backwards, and then we can go more into some of the nitty gritty of metrics after we've run through a simple planning example. So let's say that we have a recruiting desk that has a billing goal of $240,000 for the year and an average placement fee of $20,000. Now, working out your average placement fee, quite simply, just take your total revenue for the year divided by the number of placements, and that'll give you your average placement fee. Yes, some placements will be less, some placements will be more, but this is a very good indicator. Very simply then, if we have a revenue goal of $240,000 and we have an average placement fee of $20,000, we need to make 12 placements or 1 placement per month. Then we get to our first thing. How many first-time interviews need to take place before somebody is hired? Now, this number changes per desk. It changes on the nature of the desk. But if you, in the absence of any historical information to tell you anything different, we recommend a figure of 8. So that's 8 first-time interviews. So it could be 3 first-time interviews at one client and 5 first-time interviews at another client, also known as send-outs, would on average result in a placement. Yes, you can go through periods of 16, 17, 18 first-time interviews without making a placement, but then what you will find is you will very quickly make a couple placements in a row. So these ratios that we're talking about are really just the odds. And if you play in the recruiting industry, these are the odds that you're playing to. So if we need to make 12 placements and we have a first-time interview to placement ratio of 8, that means we need to have 96 first-time interviews take place over the course of a year, and that's 8 per month or 2 per week. Quite simply, 12 times 8 is 96, and divided by 12 to get you 8, and then 2 per week. Then the next question that we ask is, how many candidates do we need to submit to roles, present to clients before we get one that is invited to a send out? And just for the sake of illustration today, we're going to use a figure of 2 to 1. Again, once you've got some historical information, you would have your own numbers. Typically, this number is a little bit lower for a more established firm, but just again, for simplicity and an understanding, we take a submission to interview ratio of 2 candidate submittals before a send out or a first time interview. That would mean that we would need to submit 16 candidates a month. So that's 8 times 2 is 16, or 4 per week. So now we're already starting to get down to what it is we can do on a weekly basis to ensure that we get our revenue goal of $240,000 at the end of the year. So now, as opposed to just thinking of what we might possibly bill at the end of the year, we have something far more clear as a goal for the week. If we can submit 4 candidates a week on a consistent basis, based on all our other numbers, we will hit a revenue goal of $240,000 on this particular desk. Then The next thing is, how many candidates do we need to speak to before we find one that we're willing to submit? Regardless of the method that we use to find candidates, yes, we may be messaging them on LinkedIn. Yes, we may have a solid database of candidates. We're still going to phone up that candidate and speak to him or her about the role that we have open. You may not need to speak to as many as 10 before you find a submittable candidate. But again, for simplicity purposes and for people that are just starting out and don't really have any sort of grasp on their numbers, we work off a figure of 10. So in order to submit 4 candidates a week, the total number of recruit presentations that would be needed would be 40 recruit presentations a week in order to submit our 4 candidates. The next thing is, let's assume we're doing contingent search, and in a typical contingent desk, we place about 20% of the roles. So 1 in 5 roles are placed. So that gives us a job. Our odds, again, our job order to placement ratio is 5 to 1. So that would mean that we need to, in order to make our placement figure of 12, remember we need to make 12 placements to hit our $240,000 revenue goal, we need to then have 60 job orders per year, or 5 per month. Then what comes back from that is, now how many clients do we need to be speaking to and qualifying roles on a weekly basis? Well, we're saying that we're going to need to speak to about 10 clients before we get a job order that we're prepared to work. So in order to have 5 roles a month, we need to have 50 marketing presentations over the course of a month, which is 12.5 marketing presentations a week, or 52. And if we add up our total recruit presentations with our total marketing presentations, then our goal for a week is 52.5, call it 53 presentations per week. So now what we've done is we've taken a goal that was $240,000 that we're hoping we're going to get it, but we're not so sure that we're going to get it. And we've brought this down to a very achievable, measurable activity for the week. So we need to be speaking to 52, 53 people a week. So that's 10 people a day. If we make 10 connects over the course of a day, we're on goal for our $240,000 at the end of the year. As our business progresses and we get more and more familiar with our numbers and our ratios tighten up, these metrics will change. But the important part is to keep track of them and to know them and to adjust our plans accordingly.